Okay, yesterday I talked a little bit about the protests that are going on in British Columbia, Canada, and other parts of Canada by the Indigenous people. Um, it's winter in Canada, February 15th, and people in Eastern Canada who rely on propane are running out of propane. What do they use propane for? To heat their houses. So you have indigenous protesters and their non indigenous supporters cheering that the National Railway of Canada has been shut down and that people in Eastern Canada are freezing in the dark. This is a strange phrase, freeze in the dark, because it was reputed to be said by Alberta, Canada people, Albertans, way back in the time of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's father's era, Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau introduced a made in Canada oil price, which was lower than the world oil price. Trudeau felt at the time that Canadians in general should benefit from living in a land that had lots of oil. He wasn't the only one. Many other countries that were oil rich, Saudi Arabia, for example, have very low prices for gas because they are swimming in oil. And Pierre Trudeau felt this was a good idea. But people in Alberta felt that it was going to cut into their profit streams. And they wanted to shut off the oil. And they wanted people back in Eastern Canada, where the capital of Canada is, Ottawa, Ontario, to literally go and freeze in the dark. But it's not Albertans who are going to make Canadians freeze in the dark. It is the Indigenous people who are going to make Canadians freeze in the dark. Propane is shipped by railway tank cars. What would one do? Well, Justin's father had no problem calling in the military when there was perceived insurrection in Quebec province. Pierre sent out the army, and his son is off in Africa screwing around because everyone knows that the highest education Justin Trudeau ever got was teaching snowboarding in Whistler. So, my recommendation to Justin Trudeau is to send in the army. And unfortunately for the native protesters, they are going to have to be removed from all of the places where they are blocking traffic. Why is it unfortunate? It's unfortunate because they're tackling the problem that they have called a problem using force. Blockading and going against court injunctions is the wrong way to do things. Granted, the Indigenous people of Canada were screwed over by previous generations of what they now call white settlers. However, the current day Indigenous people were born under this particular regime, as was plenty of the white settlers. And to try to reverse history today by making Eastern Canadians freeze in the dark is, someone says, morally bankrupt. Yes, it's morally bankrupt, and it is, well, does it work? I guess that's the whole thing. Tune in tomorrow for more comments. If you were interested in Canadian history, you will see that the British Empire left a The best nearest thing I can come up with is Gordian knot, which is an old term meaning just a pile of shit. Just a pile of shit. If you look at the way that what they call Commonwealth countries, or countries that were formerly part of the British Empire, the way they are set up constitutionally, and also the American Republic is also set up. It's set up where it is exceptionally frustrating. It is what they call in the United States the checks and balances system. And that's the way the whole British system is based upon. There is no one who is in absolute authority. There are all kinds of divisions in the government structure so that nothing can ever be accomplished. Someone said the Canadian Prime Minister has more power than the American President in their own country. Is it true? Not so much today, perhaps at one time. But because they used to say, well, the American president has a constitution that limits his powers. Well, so does the Canadian Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister had more power. Now, today, no, not so much. It's just that the historical wrongs to the Indigenous people are well documented. They were pushed off the land. And, the very expensive land in Canada today that is owned by either white settlers or Asian settlers is formerly free to all of the Indigenous people to travel around on or to fight over, because there's quite a bit of documentation in history that the Indigenous peoples prior to the white settlers fought horrible wars among each other's tribes. So it wasn't all beautiful and peaceful in North America. Anyways, what can Canadians do about their lack of propane in Eastern Canada? They're fucked. They're totally fucked. And so some white sympathizers of the Indigenous protesters said, how does it feel, white and Asian settlers, to have no power, no heat in your homes, no power? They primarily mean no ability to change the system that is so horribly broken and that so horribly screwed the Indigenous population. How does it feel? Well, for the present day Canadians, pretty much it makes them very, very angry. Horribly angry, to the point where some of these people are looking at the Indigenous protesters and they want the army to go in and slaughter them. This is the problem with human beings. They get furiously angry when there's no food and there's no heat for their homes. And there's no prime minister even in the country. No one responds. It's why I call Canada a failed state. It is a failed state, and these kind of things demonstrate. They totally demonstrate what a failed state is. It's a country full of people, and everyone is powerless to stop the juggernaut of violence, stupidity, and the inheritance of the British Empire. What needs to happen? The Canadian Constitution needs to be abolished. The system of government of the Canadian country needs to be removed. And, there's the Australian song, Beds Are Burning by Midnight Oil. That was in the 1980s. And they said, let's give back the land to the Indigenous people. This is a stupid idea. Only a stupid, drunken Australian band would come up with something like this. Why? Well, because the Indigenous protesters say, white settler, go back where you came from. In other words, Europe, I suppose. The thing is that the white settlers that are here today, they're not white settlers. They've been here for generations. And granted, somewhere down the line, someone immigrated here, but plenty of white settlers interbred with the Indigenous people. So it's very easy to find people in Canada who, if they look at their ancestry, have Indigenous ancestry and European ancestry, and now Asian ancestry and African ancestry. In other words, it's a, someone says polyglot, no one knows what that means, but if you compare it to dog breeding, everyone here is a mutt. So just because someone looks white doesn't mean they don't have a treaty card that says they're Indigenous. I've seen them. I've seen people, and look at my skin. It is white as white can be. But I have seen people just as white as me who pull out, it's called an Indian treaty card. Why? Because the law on the books of the government Canada is actually called the Indian Act, and it's politically incorrect to call someone Indigenous Indian, even though the government of Canada has a Department of Indian Affairs that administers the Indian Act, which is an act to create two tiers of citizenship in Canada. Either you are a treaty Indian or you are not. This system was adopted by South Africa. What? Yes, South Africa, who we, well, maybe you're not old enough to remember the white minority rule in South Africa. What does that mean? It means if you were white, you ruled everyone else who was either a mixture of white and black or brown or black. In other words, if you were white and a very small minority of the total population, you ruled. This system was modeled on the Canadian Indian Act. Everything that was done by the British Empire in Canada was exported around the world, and in South Africa, it was called apartheid. Apartheid was abolished decades ago under de Klerk and Mandela. But in Canada, we still have apartheid. It's called the Indian Act, and it's still in force. Does it make people? Oh, it makes people very angry, but no one will change it. Why? Non-Indigenous Canadians would like to see this gone because they know that the whole system is rotten to the core. But there are certain Indigenous groups who want to keep it. Why? It beats me. Why the hell do you? It's because of racism. It is because the Indigenous people, not all Indigenous people, but the ones who want to keep the Indian Act, these Indigenous people are racist. They believe that because they were born in Indigenous skin, they were maltreated. Well, perhaps this is because of the storytelling that goes on. What's the whole point? Well, You really can't fix a shitty history of planet Earth. An unbelievable shitty history of man's abuse of other mans and woman's abuse of other women's and vice versa, man versus woman. The whole shit show is unbelievable. Human history on planet Earth is a disgusting disgrace. And how to fix it? Well, if you're going to use racism to fix it, which is what, the song Beds Are Burning, let's give the land back to people the mongrels who descended from the previously pure-blooded indigenous people. Where the hell are all the other people who were born, in the past 80 years going to go? Europe is full. And we have no link to Europe. I'm talking about, white European-looking people who were born here in, North America. We can't go back to Europe. We were born here the same as the current indigenous people. So we look at it and say, screw you if you think somehow your racist diatribe that, my ancestors were here longer than yours is going to fly today. It ain't going to fly, buddy. It ain't going to fly. And, if you're blocking the railways of Canada and the military of Canada won't disperse you and the police forces of Canada won't disperse you, then the average Joe Canadian is going to disperse you. And we're going to have race riots in Canada. That's what I'm calling it now. I'm calling it race riots. Unbelievable horror. 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 Race riots in 2020 in supposedly advanced country called Canada because of this. Race riots. Can you imagine this? It's so close. It's so close. And what triggered it? Well, why are certain indigenous people protesting? It's sympathy strikes with this situation in British Columbia province. Sympathy strikes are an old labor thing from 100 years ago. It happened in Winnipeg, Canada, in Manitoba. The Winnipeg General Strike. The whole city went out on strike to support some unions that were on strike against their employers. In other words, everyone said, fuck you, I'm not going to work today. Why are we going back to over 100 years ago labor dispute today? It's called entitlement. I am entitled to shit that you have. Why? Because of my story. My story. Now, granted, Canada and the rest of the world is a shit show ruled by 0.1% of the population. It's worse than South African apartheid, this elite group of bazillionaires who own everything and the corporations that they own and the bribed politicians that they own. This is the heart of the matter because, the average Canadian doesn't hate the average Canadian, regardless of the color of their skin. They don't. They really don't. They grew up and they were educated about racism. But we have an incredibly controlled system, controlled by very smart people to keep all of the rest of us fighting amongst ourselves when the 0.1% actually are pulling the strings. They keep us all busy fighting amongst each other while they live off in gated communities and Epstein's Island. Who is the real enemy? Well, those ones, the 0.1%. But what good is it to us? because, the small people who are fighting amongst each other don't even know really who all these 1/10% are and the people who work for them. And even if we do, we don't know where to find them. And even if we catch them, we don't even know what the hell to do with them. Why? Well, we don't. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, the same corporations that we hate, we rely upon. We go to Walmart to get the stuff that we need, the food and the clothes that we need. So if you shut down Walmart, then what the hell are we going to do for shopping day? Even though the politicians are bribed and bought off, we still need a lot of government services. In Canada, they have Medicare. So are you going to shut down the government and then you can't go see your doctor because your doctor won't get paid and he's going to go on vacation to the United States permanently? It's quite a quagmire to clean up the mess on planet Earth and in Canada, for example. Where do you start? You have to start by looking around and, no one watches my YouTube channel. I see some people with 27 videos, and I have close to 2,000 videos, and the people with 27 videos have got 10, 100, 1,000 times the number of viewers that I have. So even though I am the smartest person in Canada, hardy har har, I have insight. Yes. Am I the smartest person? No, I just told you. I'm not the smartest person. But I am. I'm probably in... no one would call me smart. Even my friends don't call me. They said when I was very young, I was very smart. What happened? They all booked off and became indoctrinated in the British Empire and capitalism. I did too, but then I moved beyond it. And now I'm so far ahead. I'm 100 years ahead of everyone. A song by the Tragically Hip of Canadian music. Ahead by a century, the Tragically Hip. That's where I am, ahead by a century. In 100 years, will we have this fixed? No. No, it cannot be fixed. In 100 years, in 1,000 years? No. 2,000 years ago, we had the Roman Empire. 2,000 years later, this is basically the Roman Empire in 2020. What has changed? Fuck all has changed. The empire never ended was a statement made in a novel called Valis by Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick is a very famous novelist. Many of his books were turned into movies, a lot of them starring Tom Cruise. And he said in Valis, the empire never ended. I don't know when they're going to make Valis into a movie, but it'll be very good. In the meantime, you can read the novel. I'm sure it's available on Jeff Bezos' bazillionaire, trillionaire. His company is called Amazon.com. I'm Mary Had a Little Lammy reporting on the news that is totally useless. Now you can go back to listening to the Tragically Hip and Midnight Oil. And the one good thing about Canada is they legalized marijuana. So if you go on a vacation to Canada, if you go to a Canadian province called Ontario, where Toronto is, everyone knows the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Toronto Raptors, the sports teams. If you go to Toronto, the capital city of Ontario province, you can smoke marijuana even in the parks. What you can't do is to go to a corner store and buy marijuana. There is one legal store, the government monopoly store, to buy marijuana, and you can access it only through the internet. And they say it takes about 3 days for them to deliver your marijuana to an address in Canada. So, in practice, what happens in Ontario province? People do smoke marijuana and they get it from the black market. Strange but true. Oh, going back to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who did the change in the Canadian law to make this happen. Well, one of the reasons Justin Trudeau justified legalizing, well, not really legalizing, because it's called regulated access. Regulated access for marijuana in Canada was specifically to get rid of the black market in Canada. That is an F for failure in Ontario province, which is run by a politician who is called Doug Ford, whose late brother, Rob Ford, was the mayor of Toronto, Canada. If you remember Rob Ford, he was quite often on the late shows on the American television system because he was famous for being mayor of Toronto and smoking crack cocaine that he got from the black market. His brother now is what they call the premier, or, if you're an American, the premier is equivalent to the governor. So the governor of Ontario province is the brother of the former mayor of Toronto, and his name is Doug Ford. And he is the reason why there is no legal, well, there are very few. He screwed it up so badly on purpose because he's in bed with the black market. He doesn't want a legal market. He likes the black marketeers. So in most cities in Ontario province, you cannot buy marijuana. Can you buy it in Toronto? You could look it up, but it's an enormous city of millions, and the number of legal outlets to buy marijuana is teeny tiny, certainly not enough for the huge population. So the black market thrives in Justin Trudeau's Canada. It is the most screwed up country on the planet. Not really. Not really. It's equally screwed up as every other country on the planet. That's how I will leave it. I'm Mary Had a Little Lammy, reporting on Rumplestiltskin TV.